3 Aprils ago, I stood in front of 4 raised beds that were completely empty. Not because I had not planned. I had planned obsessively. I had read the seed packets. I had drawn the grid on graph paper. I had even color-coded the planting zones by crop family. But when April arrived, I froze. I did not know which things were safe to go in now and which things still needed to wait. So I waited. I waited for a sign, for a warm spell that felt warm enough, for some invisible permission that never came. And I missed the entire cool season window. By the time I finally planted, the soil temperature had climbed past what lettuce and spinach and peas could tolerate, and they bolted within 3 weeks of going in. I got almost nothing from those 4 beds that spring. And the reason was not bad seeds or bad soil or bad weather. The reason was that I did not have a clear non-negotiable list of exactly what goes in the ground in April and what does not. This video is that list. Not a general guide, not a soft suggestion. A hard checklist organized by urgency and category so that by the end of this video, you know precisely what to plant in your raised beds this week, what to direct sow versus transplant, and what to start indoors right now so you do not repeat the mistake I made 3 years ago. April is the most important planting month of the entire year for raised bed gardeners in temperate climates. The reason is simple. Raised beds warm up faster than open ground. The walls hold heat. The loose, well-draining soil allows roots to penetrate immediately. And that means you can plant things in raised beds 2 to 3 weeks earlier than your neighbors who are gardening in flat open soil. But that advantage only works if you use it. If you plant in April what most people wait until May to plant, you get a head start that compounds through the entire season. You finish your cool season crops before the summer heat destroys them. You get your warm season starts in the ground earlier. And you end up harvesting in October, while everyone else's garden is already finished. April is divided into 2 phases, and you need to treat them differently. The first phase is early April, the first 2 weeks, when night temperatures are still regularly dropping and any warm season crop is at risk of a cold shock. And the second phase is late April, the final 2 weeks, when the last frost date for most Zone 5 through 7 gardeners is either behind you or only days away. Each phase has its own list, and mixing them up is what causes failure. Let's start with the early April list. These are the crops that not only tolerate cold, but actually require it. They taste better after a frost, they grow faster in cool soil, and if you do not get them in the ground in the first 2 weeks of April, they will struggle through the heat of late spring and produce almost nothing. Crop 1 is peas. Peas are the single most important crop to get in the ground in early April, and they are the one crop that most raised bed gardeners consistently plant too late. Peas need cool soil to germinate. They need cool air to climb and flower, and they stop producing entirely once temperatures push past 75 degrees Fahrenheit consistently. Which means, if you plant them in May, you get maybe 3 weeks of harvest before heat shuts them down. But peas planted in the first week of April will produce for 6 to 8 weeks, giving you enough fresh pods to eat daily and enough surplus to freeze or dry for winter. Direct sow peas 2 inches deep and 2 inches apart in double rows along the north side of your raised bed, so they do not shade anything else. Push a trellis in immediately because peas will begin climbing within 10 days of germination, and they climb fast. Soak the seeds overnight before planting to speed germination, and choose a shelling variety like alderman or a sugar snap variety like super sugar snap for the highest yield per square foot. Crop 2 is broad beans, also called fava beans. Broad beans planted in early April in raised beds will be ready to harvest in late May and early June, giving you one of the most satisfying and protein-rich harvests of the entire spring garden. And because they fix nitrogen through bacteria in their root nodules, they are simultaneously improving the soil in your raised bed while they grow, which means whatever follows them in that bed gets a free fertility boost without any added compost or fertilizer. Sow broad beans 4 inches apart and 3 inches deep. They are large seeds, so they go in quickly and germinate reliably, even in cold soil. And unlike peas, broad beans do not need a trellis. They grow upright on their own, up to about 4 feet, though they benefit from a simple frame of bamboo stakes and twine in a raised bed to prevent wind damage. Crop 3 is spinach. Spinach is the fastest cool-season green you can grow in a raised bed, going from seed to harvest in as little as 30 days for baby leaf size. And April-planted spinach in a raised bed is particularly productive because the soil is warmer than open ground, but the air is still cool enough that the spinach does not bolt. Sow spinach half an inch deep in a grid pattern 4 inches apart, across the entire surface of one raised bed panel, or in rows 6 inches apart. Thin the seedlings to 6 inches once they are 3 inches tall, and use the thinnings immediately as salad greens. Then harvest the outer leaves of the remaining plants continuously, and they will keep producing for 6 to 8 weeks before the heat finally forces them to bolt. Crop 4 is lettuce. Lettuce sown directly in raised beds in early April will give you heads of salad by mid-May and will produce cut-and-come-again harvests for weeks if you handle them correctly. Choose loose-leaf varieties over head varieties for April sowing because loose-leaf types are more heat-tolerant and produce continuously, whereas head varieties like iceberg mature all at once. Broadcast lettuce seeds thinly across a bed and barely press them into the surface because lettuce needs light to germinate. Mist gently until they sprout and thin to 8 inches apart once they reach 2 inches in height. Harvest by cutting the outer leaves to within an inch of the growing point. The plant will regrow 2 or 3 times before it bolts. Crop 5 is radishes. Radishes are the most overlooked crop in the April raised bed, and they are the one crop that rewards impatience. They germinate in 3 days in warm soil. They are ready to harvest in 25 days, and they do 3 things at once in a raised bed. They mark your rows of slower germinating crops so you do not accidentally disturb them. They break up compacted surface soil with their taproots. And they give you something to harvest while you wait for everything else to establish. Sow radish seeds half an inch deep and 2 inches apart in any available space, tucking them between your pea rows, your lettuce grid, your spinach bed. They will be pulled and eaten before they ever compete with the main crop. Crop 6 is turnips. Turnips are a forgotten April crop that most raised bed gardeners never consider because they think of them as a fall vegetable. But April-sown turnips in a raised bed will give you tender sweet roots in late May and early June, plus a continuous supply of turnip greens throughout April and May that are some of the most nutritious leaves you can eat. Sow half an inch deep in rows 8 inches apart, thin to 4 inches once established, and harvest the greens by cutting the outer leaves while the root develops below. Crop 7 is kale. Transplants of kale started indoors in late February or early March are ready to go into raised beds in early April, and they will provide continuous harvests of leaves from now until next winter. Kale is virtually indestructible in a raised bed. It tolerates late frosts, it tolerates heat better than spinach or lettuce, and it improves in flavor after a frost, becoming sweeter and more tender than kale harvested in summer. Space kale transplants 18 inches apart in the raised bed. Harvest only the outer leaves, leaving the growing tip intact. And one kale plant, placed in a raised bed in early April, will produce continuously for 12 months. Crop 8 is Swiss chard. Swiss chard planted in early April in a raised bed bridges the gap between cool-season greens and warm-season crops. It tolerates light frost, it tolerates summer heat, and it produces continuously from April right through October without ever bolting, which makes it one of the most productive crops per square foot in the entire raised bed garden. Direct sow chard seeds, 1 inch deep and 6 inches apart. Each chard seed is actually a cluster of 2 or 3 seeds, so thin ruthlessly to one plant per position once they sprout. Harvest by cutting outer stems at the base, and the plant will replace them within 2 weeks. Crop 9 is Asian greens. This category includes bok choy, mizuna, tatsoi, and pak choy. All of them thrive in the cool soil and cool air of early April. All of them are ready to harvest in 3 to 4 weeks for baby leaf size. And all of them bolt relatively quickly in heat, which is why April is their ideal window. Direct sow any of these half an inch deep in broadcast fashion across a bed panel. Harvest as cut and come again greens and replace them with a warm season crop in late May or early June when they finally bolt. Crop 10 is arugula. Arugula sown in early April produces peppery, flavorful leaves in about 3 weeks and will keep producing cut-and-come-again harvests for 6 weeks before it bolts in the heat. Broadcast seed thinly across any empty corner of a raised bed. Press gently into the surface. Water and wait. The flavor is most complex when harvested young, and the same bed can be resown with arugula again in September for a second full harvest, giving you 2 crops per season from the same space. Now we move to the late April list. These are the crops that go in during the final 2 weeks of April, once your last frost date is within a week or already behind you. Most Zone 5 gardeners have their last frost between April 15th and May 1st. Zone 6 gardeners are usually safe after April 10th, and Zone 7 gardeners can often start this list as early as the first week of April. You know your local frost dates. Do not plant any of these before that window unless you have frost protection in place. Crop 11 is potatoes. Late April is the ideal time to plant seed potatoes directly in raised beds. And raised beds are actually the perfect environment for potatoes because the loose, well-drained soil means tubers can expand without compaction, and you can harvest by simply reaching into the bed without digging. Plant chitted seed potatoes 4 inches deep and 12 inches apart. If your raised bed is 4 feet wide, you can fit 3 rows of 4 potatoes in a single 4 by 8 foot bed, giving you 12 plants per bed. Mound the soil up around the stems as they grow, covering all but the top few inches of foliage each time the plant reaches 8 inches. This hilling process multiplies the number of tubers that form along the buried stem, and a single 4 by 8 foot raised bed planted with 12 seed potatoes in late April will yield between 30 and 50 pounds of potatoes by July. Crop 12 is beetroot. Beetroot direct sown in late April in raised beds produces sweet tender roots by late June, and is one of the most space-efficient crops you can grow in a 4 by 4 or 4 by 8 configuration. Sow beet seeds half an inch deep in rows 8 inches apart and thin to 4 inches apart once established. Like chard seeds, beet seeds are clusters that produce multiple seedlings, so thin carefully, and use the thinnings as microgreens. Harvest roots when they reach the size of a golf ball or larger depending on variety, and stagger your sowing every 2 weeks through May for a continuous supply rather than a single glut. Crop 13 is carrots. Carrots are the most rewarding and most frustrating crop in a raised bed garden. Rewarding because a raised bed filled with loose, stone-free compost-rich soil produces straight, sweet, supermarket-quality carrots with almost no effort. Frustrating because carrot seeds are tiny and slow to germinate, and many gardeners give up on them before they sprout. Sow carrot seeds very thinly in rows 6 inches apart, barely covering them with a thin layer of fine compost. Keep the surface consistently moist for the 10 to 14 days it takes for them to germinate, and then thin to 2 inches apart once they are established. A single 4 by 8 foot raised bed sown densely with carrots in late April will produce enough to harvest fresh through summer and store into winter. Crop 14 is onions from sets. If you did not start onions from seed in January, as we discussed in our winter planning video, late April is the time to plant onion sets directly in raised beds for a summer harvest. Push individual onion sets just below the surface of the soil, with the tip pointing upward, spacing them 4 inches apart in rows, 8 inches apart. They will sprout within a week. And while onions from sets produce slightly smaller bulbs than those started from seed, they require none of the indoor growing time, and they store well through winter. Crop 15 is garlic, if you have not already planted it. In mild zones, late April is a last opportunity to get garlic in the ground for a reduced but still worthwhile summer harvest. Plant individual cloves 2 inches deep and 6 inches apart with a pointed end up. Mulch with 3 inches of straw. And the garlic will spend the remaining spring weeks establishing roots and pushing up strong green shoots that will be ready to harvest as green garlic in late spring, even if the full bulb does not develop to its maximum size. Crop 16 is salad onions, also called scallions or bunching onions. Salad onions sown directly in raised beds in late April will be ready to harvest in 6 to 8 weeks, and they can be sown continuously every 2 weeks from now through August for a non-stop supply of fresh green onions. Sow seeds half an inch deep in rows 4 inches apart. Pull the entire plant when the onion is pencil thick. No thinning required. Crop 17 is parsley. Parsley transplants started indoors 8 to 10 weeks ago are ready to go into raised beds in late April, and they will produce continuously through summer and well into fall. Parsley is biennial, meaning it will survive winter in mild climates and flower in its second spring. So a single planting in April of this year may give you fresh parsley all the way through next June. Space transplants 8 inches apart. Harvest by cutting the outer stems at the base, and the plant will regenerate within 2 weeks. Crop 18 is cilantro. Cilantro direct sown in late April will provide fresh leaves within 3 weeks and will bolt quickly in summer heat. For this reason, you want to sow small amounts every 2 weeks from late April through mid-May and then stop until September when cooler temperatures return. Sow seeds half an inch deep in clusters of 3 seeds every 6 inches. Thin to 1 plant per cluster. Harvest the young leaves before the plant sends up a flower stalk. And when it does bolt, let it set seed, and the dried coriander seeds are as valuable in the kitchen as the fresh leaves. Now, here is where the checklist thinking breaks down and why most gardeners end up with gaps in their beds through May and June. They plant the cool season crops in early April. They wait for late April to plant the next round, and then they forget to start the warm season transplants indoors in early April, so they are ready for late May when the soil is finally warm enough to receive them. This is the bridge list. The things you must start indoors right now in early April, so you are not caught empty-handed in late May. Start tomatoes indoors this week if you have not already. They need 6 to 8 weeks of indoor growing before transplanting outside. Start them in 3-inch pots filled with seed starting mix. Keep them at 70 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, provide maximum light, and pot them up into 4-inch containers when the first true leaves appear. Start peppers this week as well. Peppers need even more time than tomatoes. Ideally 10 to 12 weeks indoors, which means peppers started in early April will be ready for late May or early June transplanting. Keep pepper seedlings warmer than tomatoes at 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit because peppers are tropical plants and will refuse to germinate in cool conditions. Start basil indoors in mid-April, about 4 weeks before your last frost date. Basil is extremely frost sensitive and should never go outside until nighttime temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But basil started indoors in mid-April will be large enough to transplant in late May and will provide fresh leaves all summer. Start cucumbers indoors in the last week of April. Cucumbers need only 3 to 4 weeks of indoor growing before they can go outside, which means a late April indoor start produces large, vigorous transplants ready for the raised bed in late May. Do not start cucumbers any earlier than this because they grow so fast indoors that they become root-bound and leggy before they can go outside. Start courgettes, also called zucchini, in the last week of April for the same reason. 3 to 4 weeks of indoor growing produces stocky, strong plants ready for the raised bed in late May. And courgettes need only 1 or 2 plants per bed because they are extraordinarily productive, and a single courgette plant in a raised bed will produce more fruit than a family of 4 can eat in a week. Now, here is the system summary that ties all of this together. April in the raised bed is not one planting. It is 4 simultaneous actions happening in parallel. You are direct sowing cool season crops outdoors. In the first 2 weeks, you are transplanting cool season starts from indoors to the beds in the first 2 weeks. You are direct sowing the second wave of cool season crops in the final 2 weeks, and you are starting the warm season transplants indoors during the first 2 weeks, so they are ready when the cool season crops are done. These 4 actions overlap and interlock, and the result is a raised bed that is always full, and always producing with no gaps and no wasted space. The April raised bed system is not about planting, it is about sequencing. Plant cool first, start warm in parallel, and never let a bed sit empty. Every April that passes with empty raised beds is a season of food security you cannot recover. The beds are there, the soil is ready, the seeds are waiting. April does not ask for your perfection, it only asks for your action. Get the peas in this week. Get the spinach in this week. And start those tomatoes on your windowsill tonight, because the garden that feeds you all year does not start in May when the weather is comfortable. It starts in April when you decide you are done waiting.